Thank you so much for taking the time, and we are very excited to hear all the things you have to share with us. A little bit about Erin first. Erin coordinates outreach and communication efforts with the USA NPN and Nature's Notebook. Super cool stuff. She is also the USA NPN's liaison to Fish and Wildlife Service, also super cool, and is working with the National Wildlife Refuges across the country to implement phenology monitoring to meet their resource management goals. It's kind of a big deal. Erin's education, she received her BA in environmental biology from University of Colorado at Boulder, then worked on a variety of field biology projects around the US and abroad. She came to the USA NPN as a Peace Corps Fellow in 2010 during her graduate program at the University of Arizona's School of Natural Resources and the Environment. You went to a lot of really cool schools. In 2013, she was awarded a Master of Science for her research on the influence of endangered red squirrel middens on wildlife species diversity. Everybody, please buckle up and get ready for Erin's presentation. Again, thank you so much. We just can't wait.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I am really glad to be here to be talking to you all about phenology. So let me just share my screen so we can get started. All right. Let me just launch right in here. So what I want to cover today is I'm going to talk to you all about phenology. And a lot of you have probably never heard the word phenology. I certainly had never heard of phenology back in 2010 before I started working at the NPN. But basically what phenology is all about is it's the timing of life cycle events of plants and animals. So once you hear that, then I'm sure all of you know what phenology is and what it's all about. But we're going to really talk about why phenology is important and how it's a great indicator of climate change and has many, many other applications as well. And then I'm going to go through how you can actually get involved in tracking phenology in your own backyard. I'm going to share a bunch of resources that we at the USA NPN have to help you do that. And then I'm going to talk to you about another option we have, which is actually to work with other people to track phenology as a local phenology program. But I would love to hear, I always like to ask people what is blooming right now where you live, a big part of phenology. So if you want to share that in the chat, I would love to hear about what's going on with phenology right now. We'll see if anything pops up. I can tell you that we have a plant called the sacred datura plant that has these massive white flowers. It blooms at night. It's really popular with moths, and it's just been going bonkers for the last month. But last night especially, it was blooming with all these fresh blooms, and it smelled awesome. So that was really exciting for us here. Let's see. It looks like someone posted cardinal flowers. That is a really great pollinator plant. Okay, and the chat has been disabled, it looks like. So I think people have to put it in the Q&A if you want to.
I'll check that out, but for now the Q&A will work. But I'll check out the chat.
Okay, cool. And I'll we'll check back in on that in a little bit. All right. So first off, just a little bit more about why we feel like phenology is very important and useful in a variety of different fields. So maybe the most obvious is for biology and ecology and kind of understanding how things are happening, when they're happening in nature. So you can think about a plant-pollinator relationship. It's important to know, when the flowers are open and the nectar is available, as well as when the pollinators are active, whether they're going to be able to pollinate those flowers. So by studying phenology, we can get a great idea about whether those things are synced up or whether they're becoming mismatched. But there's lots of other applications as well. So you can think about agriculture, so knowing about when to plant different crops or when to harvest them, also when to time treatment for pests that might impact agriculture, and also wildfire, so knowing about when things are greening up in the springtime and how much fuel is going to be available in a particular year, and then when those plants are kind of drying out and creating that higher fuel load. Can really inform the timing of when wildfire season is going to be happening, as well as how severe it might be. And then similarly for our allergy season, so knowing about when plants have open flowers, when they're releasing their pollen, we can use phenology information to know and actually forecast when allergy season will start, how long the season will be, how severe it's going to be by knowing about when those flowering stages are happening. And then also for invasive species management, phenology is very important. So for knowing about when plants are green enough where you could use herbicide on them, knowing about when certain insect pests are hatching and at a stage where you can treat them with pesticides, all of that is related to knowing about those timings of those different life cycle stages. And so by studying phenology, we can really inform all of these different aspects of management and science. And phenology is also a really great indicator of climate change. So way back in 2007, the IPCC in one of the early reports stated that phenology is maybe the simplest way for us to see how things are responding to climate change, because we can see that with our own eyes. We can go out and we can see when the plants are blooming, when they're leafing out, when insects are hatching, and we can see whether that's changing from year to year. And maybe it's shifting earlier with earlier springs, warmer temperatures. And it's something that's very easy to observe and a lot of people can take part in. So we were actually established in 2007, kind of around the time of that IPCC report, because people recognized that phenology is this really powerful tool, but we didn't have a standardized way for us to collect this kind of information in the US. So we were set up as kind of a way for people to collect information all across the country about phenology, a place to store all of that information. And then we also have a big emphasis on being able to share all of that data. So we don't want to just collect all the information. We want to make sure that it's available to anyone who wants to use it. So we have a big emphasis on making the data available through visualization tools and data download tools. And then we also do a lot of work to talk with different types of audiences, like the Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Park Service, to really find out what their needs are for this kind of information and then put it in the right format where they can really use it right away. So just to share a few examples of kind of some different types of projects we're working on. So we are really interested in the timing of when food resources are available for wildlife. So we have a couple different projects. One is a project all across the country that's focused on when nectar is available for monarchs as well as other pollinators. And so we're looking at when flowers are opening in different nectar plants across the country. And then we're also really interested in when food is available for migrating bats as well. We have a few different bats here in the Southwest that migrate up from Mexico. And we're interested in knowing whether the timing of when they're arriving coincides with when the food resources are available. And those are things like agaves and columnar cacti. We're also involved in tracking information about seed timing. This is really useful for restoration projects. So by knowing about when seeds are ripening, that could really help managers be more efficient in where and when they're going out to collect seeds. And so we have a partner here in Arizona who are tracking the timing of agave fruiting so they can know when to go out and collect the seeds and then be able to grow up those plants to then plant to support animals like the lesser long-nosed bat. And then we've also had a number of projects focused on invasive species. So this is one on Midway Atoll, where they have an invasive plant called golden crownbeard or Verbicina enceloides. And that pretty much took over the islands a couple of decades ago. And they've managed to pretty much eradicate it, but there are several patches of the plant that are really tricky to get to. And they have to, because of the limited staff they have to know when to go out to different patches and how much time they have available in between when the plant's leafing out and then when it goes to seed, because they don't want it to go to seed and then keep spreading. So they were able to use phenology information to know what is that interval of time in between when it starts growing and then when it's actually dropping seeds. And so they could actually time when they were sending out their technicians to be able to go and remove the plant before it got or was able to spread its seeds. And then we can also use phenology for informing restoration timing. So we're working closely with the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge in Albuquerque. They're actually transitioning from a dairy farm. They used to be planted in alfalfa fields, and there's an old milk barn there. And they're transitioning it to natural bosque forest, as well as kind of upland grasslands, and they're going to be seasonally flooding different areas. And so they were able to use phenology information and record what was going on with when different birds were nesting on the refuge and where they were nesting, as well as when different trees were had their seeds. And they were able to use that information to know when to time their restoration work. So they knew that they had cliff swallows and barn swallows that were nesting in the old milk barn. So they looked back at the data that they collected and they could see when the nesting was happening, and they could avoid that time period when they were doing the demolition of the barn. And they were actually also able to look at when the different tree species were seeding, because they wanted to be able to promote the growth of cottonwoods by seasonally flooding when they knew that the cottonwood seeds were on the ground, but then they wanted to avoid doing the flooding when the Siberian elm, which is an invasive tree, was having its seeds, so they could avoid promoting that species. So these long-term data are just super valuable in being able to understand how things are changing. And I really like this example of work that was done by Aldo Leopold, who you've probably heard of, and his daughter, Nina Leopold Bradley. And so Aldo Leopold had started recording information about the first arrivals of different birds, like sandhill cranes and geese, as well as different wildflowers when they were blooming. And he wrote that all down in a notebook, and his daughter actually continued on those observations. And so we ended up having this 60-year data set looking at when these things were happening. And so some researchers were able to look at that data and actually see that there was a shift happening in when the arrival time of the birds was. And it was actually 2 to 3 weeks earlier in recent decades compared to way back when Aldo Leopold first started reporting his data. So because we had that data, we're able to see that change. But if no one had written it down, if we didn't have that information, then we wouldn't be able to make that discovery. So it just kind of shows you the value of writing things down, and especially writing things down in a standardized way where we can then use the data and then compare the data. So I would love to hear whether you keep track of phenology, plant and animal life cycle events where you live. Maybe you keep a nature journal, maybe you just kind of have a favorite plant or bird or other animal that you look out for. But feel free to put in the chat if you have something that you kind of watch out for, that you look forward to. Maybe you even keep records in a more formal way, but I would love to hear if you keep any kind of records. And it looks like a bunch of people posted about things blooming, lots of awesome flowers in here. Very cool. And someone said, I haven't kept track, but please know that now I will. That's excellent. So feel free to keep putting things in the chat. Speaking of keeping track of things in a long-term record, the program that we have available for helping people to do that is called Nature's Notebook. This program was started just a couple years after we were established back in 2007. And we have both the ability to track plants and animals in Nature's Notebook. And we have a lot of different people across the country that have contributed to the program. So this map shows different observation sites that people have set up. And you can see there's little circles on here as well. And that shows the amount of data that have come in from different parts of the country. So you can see that there are some patterns in this map. We have a lot of people in coastal areas and in big urban centers. And then fewer people in some of the areas that are less populated. We're always looking to fill in these gaps that we have in different areas and add to this map. But we actually also recently crossed a big milestone, which was 30 million records in the National Phenology Database, which is really exciting. So we have a lot of great information, but there's still so much more to learn. So we definitely want more people to get involved to help us keep adding points to this map. Okay, so getting into a little bit more of the details on how we're recording this information. So thinking back to the example with Aldo Leopold and his daughter Nina Leopold Bradley, what they were recording is really called event monitoring. It's the first time they saw a sandhill crane or the first time they saw a wildflower. And so it's basically one point on a data sheet that says, I saw this thing on this date. What we do is actually called status monitoring. And the main difference here is you are reporting every time you go out to look for the plant or the animal that you're observing. You report either, yes, I saw it, or no, I did not see it. And the value with this is we actually are able to more easily pinpoint when the thing that you saw started. So, I mean, we could try to trust Aldo Leopold that he actually wrote down the first date that this happened, but we don't know if he was looking before that date to see if that thing was actually happening the week or the month before. But if we have someone that was doing status monitoring and they said, no, I didn't see a sandhill crane, and then the next week they said yes, that gives us a lot more information about when that thing actually started. So we can have more of a precise estimate of when the start of that life cycle stage was. And we can also see if there's multiple periods of activity. So here in the Southwest, we have a lot of plants that flower multiple times. So we'll have something like a saguaro that will have a big blooming period in the spring, and then it'll bloom again in the fall. And if we didn't record all throughout the year, we wouldn't know that, we wouldn't have that data. And we actually do another level of observation in Nature's Notebook, which is called abundance or intensity. And so what this does is it asks you, not only did you see it, yes or no, but if you did see it, how much was happening? So how many flowers did you see, or how many birds did you see? And that really lets us get at the peak. So we want to know, for something like flowering, it's really interesting to know how much nectar was available for plants, or how many fruits were available for birds. And so by tracking the intensity, we can see when that peak happened. And in these periods where there's multiple, we can see, you know, is there a really big peak and then a smaller peak? It's really hard to see that if you just are recording a yes or no. So we get a lot of information that's very valuable, particularly for wildlife applications, by recording intensity. So how do you get involved? So basically, these are the main steps for getting involved in Nature's Notebook. You set up an account. This is accessible for anyone 13 or older. So for kids, you can do this with younger kids, you know, and do it together with them. But anyone who's 13 and older can have their own account. You'll set up a site. This can be your backyard. It can be a park that's nearby. We try to emphasize something that's convenient because we are doing these repeated observations. If you can pick something that you'll know that you'll get to, that's much better than picking like the most beautiful park that you've ever been to that's maybe like an hour away from you and you probably won't ever go to. We'd prefer that you pick your backyard or somewhere that's a little more accessible. And then you'll add at least one plant or animal to your site. For plants, you'll actually be tracking the same individual plants over time. So if you pick a tree, like a redbud tree, you would actually go back to that same tree each time. If you had a wildflower, you could have a patch of them and you could go back to that same patch over time. For animals, because you don't know if you're going to see the same individual, you'll do that at the species level. So you could add something like monarchs or different bird species, and then you'll be going back to make repeated visits. So let's get into an example. And I picked Eastern Redbud here because it's very beautiful and charismatic. So this is our data sheet for Eastern Redbud. You'll see we have different yes or no questions. We have questions about leaves, we have questions about flowers, and questions about fruits. And so we have a yes, a no, and then we also have a question mark option. And the reason we did this is we had a lot of people that were uncomfortable not answering either yes or no, even if they were not sure. So if you're not sure about something, you're welcome to put a question mark. You can always go back later and change your answer if you realize, oh yeah, that was definitely happening last week. You can change that to a yes if you need to. So for each of these questions, we don't want you to try to have to guess about what it means or try to look it up on your own or try to figure out, I have to take a course in botany now to understand what a breaking leaf bud is. We want to give you all the information that you need to answer these questions without any background in botany or the sciences. So for each of these questions, we give you what's called a phenophase definition. And the phenophases are these life cycle questions. So for example, for flowers or flower buds, we're asking you, do you see one or more fresh opened or unopened flowers or flower buds visible on the plant? Include flower buds or inflorescences that are swelling or expanding, but do not include those that are tightly closed and not actively growing. So that for plants like the Eastern Redbud, they often put on their buds over the winter. So we're trying to let you know about that you might see some tightly closed buds, but what you're really looking for is when they're swelling and expanding. And then we don't want you to include any wilted or dried flowers. So for each of these questions, we give you a description like this. And for the fruits, we even give you extra information about what the fruit looks like. So for this Eastern Redbud, you'll know that it is a ripe fruit when it has turned dark brown. So we try to give you all the information that you need right there. And then just a note about these questions, you should consider each of these questions independently. So you wouldn't feel like you have to answer either flowers or flower buds or open flowers. You can answer yes to both of these, and you actually should. Anytime you answer yes to open flowers, you're also seeing flowers or flower buds. This is kind of an overarching category. So when you start seeing those little buds start expanding, you would say flowers or flower buds. And then once they open and you can see the reproductive parts, you would say open flowers, but you would continue to say flowers or flower buds. And the same thing for fruits. So just remember as you're going through, you're answering each question kind of independently of the others. So for entering your data, we have a Nature's Notebook mobile app, and you can do everything on the app. So you can set up your account and add a plant or animal, everything that you need to do right on there. When you save the data on the app, it'll go directly into the database. This app also works offline. So if you're in a place without service, the data will be stored locally on your phone. And then once you get back into Wi-Fi, they'll be uploaded. But if you like paper data sheets, we also have that option. So you can print out paper data sheets from your page on the website and then enter them online when you're done. And then just a note about monitoring frequency. So people often ask, well, how much do I have to do this? How often do I have to go out and observe? We would love anything that you can contribute. If you can only go out once or twice a year, that's still really useful data. It all goes into the big pool, and we love all the data. So anything that you can contribute is great. If you'd like to do more, then once a week is really good. And this graph kind of shows you why more frequently is better at different times of the year. So if you think about how we're really trying to capture when things are starting or when things are peaking on your plant. So for open flowers, maybe you're going every 6 days and you're saying, no, I don't see open flowers, no. And then you see open flowers on this date, on April 9th. We know by looking at your data that there's a period of 6 days that's the uncertainty period where we don't know if it happened on April 4th or if it happened on April 9th. But if you're going more frequently, say every 3 days, then we know that period of uncertainty is only 3 days long. It happens sometime on April 4th or 5th or 6th. So that's more useful so if you'd like to do more frequent observations, try to do it around the time that things are changing, when things are starting to open, when you're getting to the peak, and then do less frequently at times when it's the winter, when things are dormant, or maybe everything has flowered and leafed out on your tree and nothing's really changing too much. You can always go less often at that point as well. Okay, and then now for the intensity part. So we do have these secondary questions about how many or how much is happening on your plant or how many animals you saw. So those questions are on the data sheets and in the app as well. So for something like flowers, we're asking how many flowers or flower buds are present. So for something like a red bud or even a larger tree, it would be really hard to try to count, of course. So we give you these bins of numbers to try to help you put your estimate into a category. So you can usually with a big tree rule out these smaller bins. And so what you're really trying to do is estimate, well, does it fall into this 1,000 to 10,000 or is it more than 10,000? And you can use methods like maybe you have like a clipboard with you or your phone, or you can hold up your hand and figure out how many are behind one little part of the plant. And then you can multiply by how many of those areas are on your plant and get a general estimate. But please don't stress out about this. You can always skip these questions. All the questions are optional. You don't even have to circle that question mark. You can skip any question you want. And also, you can skip these intensity questions completely. But if you are going to report them, just remember that what we're really interested in is the peak. So even if you don't know, is it 5 to 24 or 25 to 49, I'm not sure which one, just pick one, do your best. And what we're really trying to look for is where that peak happens. So even if you start one bin off, you'll probably get up to the most for your particular plant, and we'll be able to see that peak in intensity. Okay, so here's a little quiz for you. And you can maybe just think about it yourself, or if you want to put it in the chat, we can look at that as well. But I have an Eastern redbud picture here for you. And I have the data sheet, and I also have the phenophase definition. So I would like to ask you whether you see open flowers in this picture. And so you can read through that definition, and then I will pull up the chat and see if anyone wants to say whether or not they see, and yeah, you can say either I see flowers or flower buds, or I see open flowers, or yes, I see open flowers, or whatever you want to say, put that in the chat. And I'll give it a second for people to read through carefully the definition and then tell me what you see. So I'm getting a few answers. It looks like so far the consensus is flower buds. And yes, I would say that is correct. So I mean, you might have to have seen this plant to know when it is transitioning from those dormant buds to those regular flower buds. But you can kind of see that these have already kind of broken their bud scales and they're starting to expand and swell. If you were doing this frequently, you'd be able to see it much more easily. But we don't see any reproductive parts visible. So definitely it's not open flowers yet, but we are seeing a yes for flowers or flower buds. So good job. Okay, how about this one? Here is a picture, and I have, this is asking you about fruits. Do you see fruits or do you see ripe fruits? What do you see? Hopefully my chat is not blocking that. And so remember that we do give you the species specific definition for ripe fruits about what it looks like. So it should help you. All right, I'm getting some fruits, I'm getting some ripe fruits. Would anyone say both? It's a little bit of a trick question. So remember that you're answering these independently. So you would actually say yes for both fruits and ripe fruits for this particular one, because if you're saying ripe fruits, then it's automatically fruits as well. So you would actually say yes for both of these. So everyone is right. All right, how about let's try an animal. So here is a monarch caterpillar, and you'll see this data sheet is much longer. There's lots of questions. So remember that you can always skip if you don't feel comfortable. It can be really hard to identify the eggs if you didn't see the adult laying them. So you can always skip answering any of these that you don't feel comfortable with, or you can use the question mark if you want. But how about this? What do you see for this one in terms of the caterpillars? What would you answer for caterpillars and caterpillars feeding? All right, we're getting some caterpillar feeding. Yeah, so I would answer yes for both caterpillars and caterpillars feeding for this one. Nice job. Okay, and here's one last one for adults. So what do you see for this one? Feel free to put whatever you think you see happening here. There may be multiple. Yeah, so if you spent some time watching this monarch, you might see it flying overhead, where you might be able to say migrating adults. But from this photo, you could definitely say, I see an adult monarch, I see adults feeding, and it does look like it's probably traveling from flower to flower. It's at least going to this flower. So I would say yes to all the first three of those. So nice job, everybody. All right, so let's get into some of the resources and things that we have available for you. So we have a bunch of what we call our data collection campaigns. So these are particular efforts that are focused on species of interest to either scientists or resource managers. So we have campaigns like Nectar Connectors. This is that project where we're interested in the timing of flowering on nectar plants across the country, things that are important for monarchs and other pollinators. We also have a dogwood and lilac campaign. So you might have a flowering dogwood near you. We have a green wave campaign that's focused on maples, oaks, and poplars, and it's pretty broad. There's a lot of different maples, oaks, and poplars on that list. We have a pest patrol campaign that's focused on things like eastern tent caterpillar, emerald ash borer, things like that. This one, I don't think it's quite where you are, but it involves wild parsnip as well as Japanese and Bohemian knotweed. So I don't know if anyone has any of those. I know it's northeasty, but it probably isn't as far south as where you are. We have a redbud phenology project, and then our Quercus Quest campaign is focused on oak species. So what these campaigns are all about is we have been approached by a scientist or a natural resource manager, and they tell us we really need data on these species. Can you help us involve your observers in collecting data? So we get a bunch of people excited about these species, they add them to their site, and they report data, usually focused on certain phenophases, like we're really interested in flowering for this one, we're really interested in leaf out or leaf color for this other campaign, and then we send you updates. And so Samantha Brewer, who's also on the call today with me, she's our volunteer engagement coordinator. She sends out these lovely emails that include summaries of what people are finding. You'll get them about once a month or every other month or so. We also give you information about how the data are being used by the researchers, and then just tips on, what to look out for that month, or how to identify different species or different phenophases, with other opportunities as well. So this is the one for Eastern Redbud. And then we have this one here for Quercus Quest. So lots of great material in here. And it's just a nice way to stay engaged and kind of hear from us about what is happening with the data that you're reporting to us. We also have a number of different badges that you can earn. These are virtual badges that show up on what's called your observation deck. You can earn different badges for campaigns, but also for other things like your first observation, for reporting a no and a yes. Even for reporting negative data, the no data for animals. And then we also have a leaderboards page where you can check to see where you stand in the people that have submitted the most data. And we also have a visualization tool, so you can look at not only your own data, but also all the information that's ever been reported through Nature's Notebook. So if you have a species that you're interested in, you can go on the tool and see if we have any data for it. We have a lot of different types of visualizations, which allow you to look at things like how does the onset of when leaves started on maples compare to latitude, to see if there's this is called the green wave, or the green up of trees across the country, where it starts out in the south earlier, and then as you progress north, it happens later as the trees green up from south to north. We also have phenology calendars where you can see those. These are the yes data in color, and then the no data in gray. And then we have an activity curve, which is gives you a lot of information about the amount of data that have been reported on a particular phenophase. So for something like saguaro flowers, you can see not only was there a yes or no on a particular date, but how many people were saying yes at different times of the year. And that really helps you get at that peak. And then we can also look at the interaction between plants and animals. So here we're looking at saguaro flowering and white-winged doves, which are a migrating dove that love to feed on saguaro flowers and fruits, and how those different species interact. So I invite you to explore those data. I think Samantha's going to put the link for you in the chat for the Viz tool. But we have seasonal stories on the landing page, which will really help you kind of orient to how to use the tool and all the different things that you can do. Or we have a data explorer where you can just dive right in and look for different species. And because all of the data that are reported are freely accessible for everyone to use, we have lots of scientists that have downloaded and used the data. I think we're up to 120 peer-reviewed publications now using the Nature's Notebook data. So you can rest assured that the data that you're reporting will be used by someone in the future. We have just scientists coming to us all the time telling us that they use the data. And here are just a few examples of the different ways that they've done that. So lots of different uses. And we also have summaries that we put out every other month of kind of just like the basics on what the study found and why it's significant and why you should care about it. So we post those via our newsletters, which you can sign up for, as well as on this vignettes page. And we have lots of training resources to help you get started. We have an observer certification course that's on our learning website. This has 5 different modules in it. I definitely recommend taking at least the first module. It goes through the basics on how to set up an account and set up a site and add plants and animals, and how to edit your data if you need to. We have a whole module just on how to use the app. And then we also have more in-depth modules that really go into the details of the phenophases, as well as how to estimate intensity. So if you really want to get into it, I think all the modules take about from 5 to 6 hours total, but you can do as much as you want on there. It's all optional, but it's a great resource. And then we also have this great botany primer, which is a guide that has lots of information about the botany that's kind of behind the phenophases. So what is a breaking leaf bud? What does a dormant bud look like in different species? It's just full of photos, and it's a great illustration of how to use Nature's Notebook. So you can download the PDF or just view it on your computer, or you can order a printed copy as well. And we also have an option for you to start what's called a local phenology program. And this might be of interest to you, some of you who maybe interact more with volunteers, or you're part of a group, even like a neighborhood association, or maybe at a school. Really what phenology programs are all about are people that are coming together to observe phenology either of the same species or at the same location. So we first kind of try to ask, if you want to set up a program, do you have a need for phenology data, or do you have a question about phenology? That would really help to kind of form your program and make it easier for you to keep it going in the long term. Maybe you want to engage people in doing science, citizen science, so you could start a local phenology program and then involve volunteers or people from the public in collecting data with you. And then try to think about, because you will have to select species, what is it that you want to report on? Are there certain species that you're really interested in? Maybe you kind of decide as a group, and that will really help maintain the interest as well in your program over time. And then just some more specifics on these programs. So we generally recommend that you kind of plan for these to take at least 2 to 3 years. It does take a while to get things up and running. Often you will have a site that you set up, and then you realize, oh, we should probably adjust this, and we want to have a more accessible walking trail to have people check on these different plants, and the ones we picked first are really far away or hard to get to. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time to adjust things. It's also really important to have someone who's kind of your leader. We call this a local phenology leader. That person will help support your volunteers, and we have a lot of training resources and things available, but having someone who's there in person who can kind of help coordinate and get stuff from our website, and even provide some in-person training is really great. And then also it's always nice when you're doing this kind of data collection to have a plan for reporting results back. And so we do this for you if you observe the campaign species. We feel like this is a really critical part of getting people to stay interested in the long term. But if you have someone that really likes to look at the visualization tool, or someone that even just signs up for the campaign emails and then shares back the data, people really like to hear about how their data are being used and what's going on, and what's the outcome of all this work that I'm doing. So it's good to have someone who's kind of the point person for at least coordinating and getting that information from us to pass on. So just a few examples of how people have kind of set up different local phenology programs that I wanted to share. So this example, these are actually all National Wildlife Refuge examples. But this first one here is the John Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge, which is a fairly urban refuge in California. And they have a lot of visitors that come in, and people that visit from all over the country. And some people, they might have a more skeptical view about climate change. So one of their big things there is to kind of show people by doing a phenology walk that they can be involved in doing the science. So even if they don't trust scientists, or they don't want to believe all the stuff that they're hearing, they can actually take part in writing down what they're seeing, and they can look at the other data that have been collected at this refuge in the past 10 years, and they can really see how things have shifted. So that's really a big part of what they're doing there, is they're using it as an outreach tool to really get people to be involved in doing science, and really, take part in that process. The Vida Oro National Wildlife Refuge I mentioned earlier, they have a really core set of volunteers that have collected data over the long term. And they're the refuge that's really transitioning right now from this old dairy and alfalfa farm into a really beautiful bosque forest and wetland area. And so they're kind of deciding now, they have this 7-year data set that they've recorded with their volunteers. And they're in this period where they've done all this restoration work, and now they want to have kind of a new vision of the project going forward. And so they're working with the pueblos that are near the refuge to have conversations with them about, well, what kind of data are you interested in? What species should we be tracking now going forward? So they're really into community involvement and kind of helping the people that live around the refuge have more ownership in what they're reporting. So they're taking a while to kind of decide on what they want to do, what species they're going to be observing going forward. And then the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge is another urban refuge in the Twin Cities area. And they have a big engagement with school groups. So they have a lot of classes that come for field trips, and they come to the refuge and they are able to take part in data collection. And we have a lot of places that do this, where they have a natural area, and so they have a lot of groups coming through. And we've had them provide phenology activities that I'm going to talk about in a bit to the school to kind of do in advance of the field trip, and then they get to come out and take part in the data collection, and then they go back and they have another activity in the classroom again. So it's really a great way to engage students in taking part in phenology data. So we have many, many resources for you for setting up a local phenology program. We have a community of practice. We have monthly calls where we get people together and share ideas, and sometimes we provide an overview of different things like the visualization tool. We have lots of guidance on how to do program planning, and we have a local phenology leader certification course, which is actually starting up in just a couple weeks, and Samantha's going to be leading that again this fall. And we just have a couple days left. If you want to submit an application for that, it's just $55 to cover the materials. You get a botany primer and a name tag that's a Nature's Notebook name tag, and a certificate. And it takes it's 10 weeks long, 60 to 80 hours. But it's just a really great way to kind of jumpstart a local phenology program. You'll get an overview to many, many different aspects of all the stuff we do at the NPN. And you'll really, by the end of it, be ready to start a program. And I mentioned we also have lots of education resources, and Samantha's also been doing this work to really streamline the information we have. So this is our old website right now, but in a couple weeks, we're going to be launching our new website, which will have even better cleaned up resources, but we still have a ton of resources on this education page here. So you can check those out if you're looking for like a one-time activity to introduce youth or students to phenology. But we also have lots of different kinds of lesson plans all the way up to college level. And I also wanted to mention that there is a North Carolina Climate Challenge going on right now. This is hosted through the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and Chris Goforth is leading that effort. Nature's Notebook is one of the featured citizen science programs, and they are doing that right now. So if you sign up, you can do Nature's Notebook through them for a few weeks, and they actually provide different kinds of equipment, including binoculars. And if you complete the challenge, which I think is 6 different weeks of phenology data through Nature's Notebook on just one plant or animal, you get to keep your pair of binoculars. So definitely a big plus for joining that effort. So you can check it out I think they have a Google form link on their website there. So just to summarize, because I know that was a lot, we would love it if you would sign up to track phenology in your backyard or another nearby location. You can sign up for a campaign if you find one that's of interest to you. We're happy to talk more with you about setting up a local phenology program, where you can check out that local phenology leader certification course or use our education resources. So I will see if there are any questions. I also put my email there in case you want to reach out, and we could put Samantha's email in the chat as well. But thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm I think we're all really hyped about it, and we're all ready to get involved. And I a comment in the chat that I want to.
Jess, I think we're having a hard time hearing you. In the meantime, I think unless Virginia wants to, I think I'll step in and see if I can find some questions here in the chat.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
You're in the world, the Albemarle Sound. Sorry?
Jess, you were cutting out there. I think you are back now. I'm
Oh,
sorry. You probably just said a lot of
start.
important things there. All right, let me see if we can find some questions here. And you guys feel free to add them to the Q&A as well. That's a little bit easier to go through them.
I'm interested in year-to-year variance in the saltwater finfish. Oh no. Am I still lagging?
Yeah, you're lagging, Jess.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Am I real time now?
I think you probably need to mute yourself, Jess, and we'll go ahead and read the questions. Let's let Luke run point on this. You're breaking up pretty badly.
Agreed. So we do have a question from Macy, and this was probably about 15 minutes ago. And she asks, are these also, I guess this might be relevant to when you were on that page, but she was asking, are there also places where we can learn about timing of plants leafing out? I've been trying to find that type of info, and I guess Samantha did send a lot of that information into the chat there.
Yeah. So I would probably look at the visualization tool first. We are limited to the species that we have available. So we have about, I think it's over 1,600 species of plants and animals now on the Nature's Notebook list. So if the plant that you're interested in is on that list and we have data for it, then you can explore when the leafing timing is in the Viz tool. So I would start there, definitely.
And so this question here comes from Judy. They ask, do the plants need to be wild or can they be in a native garden?
Yeah, that's a great question. So they can be either one. And so when you register your plant, you'll be asked a bunch of questions about it. We call that the metadata about your plant. And so you can tell us, if you know when it was planted, you can tell us the planting date, or you can kind of estimate if you want, or you can tell us whether it's watered, whether it's fertilized, whether there's like shade above it, lots of different questions to help us kind of get at why the phenology might be the way it is.
So looking through the chat, it seems like a lot of people are very excited, and it looks like a couple people have already signed up and are eager to participate. So this question comes from Andy, and this is, will we be able to share the recording of this presentation with leaders of local groups who might be interested in starting a phenology group?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to it. I don't know where you all post your recordings, but yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah, we post our recordings for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation on YouTube, typically within a week.
Yeah.
So that should be available, and we'll send that out to everyone who registered.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're also happy to do additional presentations too if you want us to come talk to your group. If you're interested in maybe starting up a local phenology program, we'd be happy to come talk to you.
Great. This question comes from Ken. They ask, I have been collecting data on for Quercus Quest, but want to know if there are other campaigns I could be contributing to in my area. How do I find those campaigns on the app?
Yeah, so we don't have a great way to find them on the app. Thank you for pointing that out. That's something that maybe in the next app update we can do that. But on the website, if you go to the Nature's Notebook website, we have the Observe menu, which is the first menu, the Join a Campaign page. You can actually see maps of the kind of the range of the plants that are in that campaign. So I would go there first to see. But I mentioned a lot of the ones that are in your area. So Green Wave would also be another one, the Redbud campaign, the Lilacs and Dogwoods campaign, and the Nectar Connectors and Pest Patrol are nationwide campaigns. So either of those as well. But yeah, I'll put the campaigns page in the chat as well.
And Erin, if this is okay with you, when we send out the recording, we like to put the slides in there as well.
Oh, sure.
For folks to look through and refresh their memory on all the information you gave them.
Definitely, yes.
And so I have a quick question before we get to these other ones here. So how do you guys handle just this large influx of data, especially with citizen science data? How do you kind of work your way through that and find what's valuable? And yeah, how do you incorporate all that data into something useful?
Yeah, so we like to think of ourselves as more of the data curators than anything else. So we don't do a lot of the analysis, at least like among our small staff. We have 7 of us right now. But what we do is we try to make the data available in lots of different formats to make it easier for other people to use. So that's kind of where we do a lot of thinking is, how can we summarize this data to make it more accessible? So we have, the raw data that we make available is like all of those zeros and ones, basically the yeses and nos, which is kind of a lot. So we also provide like a summarized version where we give you, here's when the tree started leafing out, here's when it stopped leafing out. So that's kind of the work we do, is to make sure that the data are available in different formats for people to use. But the campaigns are another way where we try to kind of funnel what is collected, what species have data collected on them. So we hear from scientists and natural resource managers about needs that they have, and then we ask people to collect data on those particular species. Because if we have, a lot of people collecting data on just a few species, that's really valuable, rather than people kind of scattered and, collecting a small amount of data on many, many species. So that's kind of why we have the campaigns, to make it easier for people to use the data.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this question's from Linda. Does MPN gather data on birds?
Yes, we do. I think we have a couple hundred bird species on our list. So if you want to see what species we have, I will put a link also to we have a species search page, and that one you can actually, if you go to the advanced tab on there, you can see the list of, actually no, it's right at the top, you'll see. You can put North Carolina, or if you're not in North Carolina, a different state, to narrow it down. And then you can also pick, this is where you would go to the advanced tab. You can go to animal group and then pick birds, and then you can see if the bird you want to observe is on our list.
This was, do you have a link for the NC Museum of Natural Sciences? I think that was included by Amy there. Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's see.
There's one at 7:01 p.m. from Jack Sproul. Did you see that one, Luke?
I must have scrolled right by it. And if anyone does have other questions, it might be easier to put it in the Q&A just so it doesn't get lost here.
Sure, I'll go ahead and read Jack's. Here in North Carolina, we are home to the largest freshwater sound in the world, the Albemarle Sound. For years, I have been interested in the substantial year-to-year variance in the saltwater finfish and shellfish species, other than the anadromous species that come into the sound. Possibly some of that is driven by changes in salinity, which is thought to be caused by changes in rainfall and winds. But for some larger species of fish, it may be due to changes in the movement of their food fish. And he is asking for your comments and insights into that, Erin, if you have some.
Yeah, so we don't do a lot with marine phenology. I think that's a area where we'd like to expand more into. We have a few salmon species. We have a couple whales. I think we have humpbacks and maybe harbor seals. We really don't have a lot of marine animals. So I can't tell you much about what's going on there. I'll try to remember, there's someone who's kind of the preeminent marine phenologist who's part of, I think, the U.S. Geological Survey. I'll try to find her contact info, but yeah, I definitely can't answer that question, but I would love for us to do more with marine phenology.
That would be great, because obviously we're right here at the coast, and I dropped in a question of my own, or maybe several questions. I was wondering if you utilize archival phenological data, and then the questions that piggyback off that one are, how far back do phenological records extend in the area that's now the U.S.? Are all of those records written, or do some cultures pass down phenological information through oral history, story, song, and other art forms like painting, drawing, or photography?
Yeah, I love that question. Yes, certainly. There are many examples of indigenous phenology that are not written, that have been passed down through oral tradition, and we are involved with a group called the Indigenous Phenology Network, and I think one of the things they're interested in is to make sure that that information isn't lost. So that's a really neat effort that's ongoing. And yeah, I would say written records, certainly the mid 1800s, there's many examples of journals and, people that have collected records, a lot of those first bird or first flower kind of records. And there are quite a few examples of how researchers have used those data. So yeah, that would be one there. We also use historical lilac records, and we actually host the lilac records in our database, so you can actually look at them in our viz tool going back to the 1950s. So that's kind of as far back as we go in terms of the NPN. But there's also a really neat effort going on right now called the Phenology Ontology. And an ontology is just a way to get like different types of things to talk to each other. So there are all these different types of data sets that exist that have to do with phenology. There's the Pan-European network, and then there's us, and then there's many, many others. And so there's an effort to try to figure out, what is your breaking leaf buds and our leaf out? How do they correspond? And can we match up and crosswalk all those things so we can really pull all those data sets together? So there's, a lot of work going on in that realm.
If anyone else has any questions for Erin, would have been the Q&A or the chat.
I did see someone mentioned our graphic design, and I will say we love our graphic designer. Her name is Carrie Moody with Studio Orange Street, and she does all of our badges and graphics, and she's wonderful.
Looks like we have a technical question. How do you copy the chat to an email? I might have to reach out to.
I think you can save the chat. At least on mine, I can see 3 little dots right next to the emoji. And you can, I think.
Okay. I'll do that. Okay, so it looks like this is from Macy. I went to the species page, but I'm having trouble finding, looks like another technical question, finding the already recorded data. I'm seeing info on how to observe, but how do we look at those charts and tables with time frames and things? In other words, where's the previously recorded data? Hard to know how to word the question.
Yeah, so under it's the more ways to connect menu on the Nature's Notebook website is the link to the visualization tool. But I will put that direct link, there it is in the chat, if you want to get to that. And that's where you can go in and look at the data that have already been recorded.
And Jessica says Globe Observer app, also known as the Globe program, works with NASA Globe Land Cover Challenge. I heard that. And Virginia, I'd love to get the links for the Marine Phenology program as well as the Indigenous Phenological Network as well.
Okay, yeah, I'm still looking for that marine phenologist, but I will, we can put the Indigenous Phenology Network link.
Well, if no one has any other questions,